talking about stars this morning. It's kind of ironic. This should be like a class for the evening time in which we could go stargazing. But uh, there's a lot of stars that we can see from Jonesboro. That's something that, of course, having a 1.5-year-old, she notices the sky all the time. She looks at it and she goes, "The sky," and we'll point at stars and go, "Star," anyways. So when we moved here, we started seeing a lot more stars than what we saw out in North Carolina, and it's refreshing to see all those stars. So anyway, we're going to be talking about stars. This is going to be our last class for apologetics. It's kind of ironic. This series on apologetics started for the young adults, and I don't see any young adults except for my wife. Maybe they'll come around eventually here. But anyway, this is the last one. Started way back in January. Got a month behind there because of reasons. But now we are finishing it up. So before we get too far into this subject of stars, I want to point out that because this is an unusual subject, I want to point out that this is a biblical subject, right? The Bible does touch on stars a number of times. Let's see. Yep, it's not quite on yet. In Genesis 1:16 through 18, we learn that the stars, were created. Genesis 1:16 through 18 says, "Then God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth and to rule over the day and over the night and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good." So God created light, and he created starlight there in Genesis. In Job 38 and verse 7, we get a little bit of a different angle of creation. When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. There is some discussion on whether or not stars there is actually a reference to angels, like a symbolic figurative reference to angels. But in any case, stars is mentioned here and mentioned as being in this creation scene. In Psalm 19:1 and 2, we get a famous passage: "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge." A really beautiful passage whenever you break it down, looking at the Hebrew poetry that's in it, showing, even though the phrase stars is not found in these two verses, stars is there by implication. Another verse, Psalm 147 and verse 4, this verse indicating how immense God's knowledge is. Psalm 147:4, "He counts the number of the stars, he calls them all by names." Have you all seen that famous picture? I think it was the Hubble Space Telescope. Anyway, where they took this random piece of they took a picture of this random piece of the sky, and they zoomed in real close, and there was galaxies found therein. Well, anyway, there's a lot of stars, and so for God to be able to calculate how many stars there are, and then to also call them each by name, that shows how great his power and knowledge concerning stars. This last verse that we're going to look at, there's other verses that we'll look at as we get further into this class. But 1 Corinthians 15, verses 40 and 41, "There are also celestial bodies," that's talking about different objects in space, "and terrestrial bodies, but the glory of the celestial is one, and the glory of the terrestrial is another. There is one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars, for one star differs from another star in glory." This is a very unique and interesting passage, because if you are living 2,000 years ago, all you're seeing are different spots in the sky. They could not figure out exactly what the stars look like. And here Paul, by inspiration, is saying that all the stars are different. They're not just spots in the sky. Each one is going to be ranging in different size and shape and makeup, chemical makeup. Anyway, so The Bible says a fair amount about stars. So we're going to look at stars and their purpose. And in doing so, we're going to look at 3 different points, right? When I was writing this class 2 days ago, Friday, boy, there's a lot of stuff that while I was refreshing myself, so I had an outline that I taught on stars from a couple years ago, and then I was like, oh, let me update this a little bit. There's a lot more that has come out about stars, or at least more that I found about stars this time around preaching on stars than I did almost 4 years ago. So we're going to really condense it down. We're going to only look at a couple of things. First of all, we're going to look at the starlight problem. This is probably the most on the nose concerning apologetics thing that we're going to look at. This is the most related to apologetics that we're going to look at. A lot of people will criticize creationism. What's creationism? Yeah, that everything was created in a week, and not Big Bang, right? Creationism is the opposite of the Big Bang theory. Creationism is going to be criticized a lot because there are stars billions of light years away, and how long does it take for a star? Let's say 1 billion. Let's say 10 billion. If a star is 10 billion light years away, how long is it going to take for that light to travel to Earth? 10 billion light years, right? That's what a light year is. It's a measure of time and distance, right? So if you're 10 billion light years away and you're shining a light, it's going to take light to travel 10 billion years to get to you, right? So that's a real problem, or theoretically, allegedly, that's a real problem for creationism. How are we able to see light 10 billion light years away if the Earth is only about 6,000 years old, which is what creationism states? All right, so we're going to look at the starlight problem. Then we're going to look at some of evolution's problems, right? Evolution is not exempt from their own problems concerning this starlight problem. And then we're going to look at constellations. Did you know that the Bible mentions constellations? That's something that I only came across about a year ago, a little less than a year ago. It was last summer that I came across this. So we're going to look at well, I knew that the Bible had mentioned constellations, but we're going to at least look at a little bit deeper as to what the Bible says about constellations. So, all right, point number 1. The starlight problem. There are 3 different theories that we're going to look at that might explain how we can see starlight billions of light years away. And let me frame this a little bit more before we get into this one. When I was in middle school, we were watching a video on space. I guess we were taking an astronomy course, and Neil deGrasse Tyson, famous astronomer. Actually, I think he's an astrophysicist. But anyway, he pointed out in that video something that stuck with me. 10 years later, he said it is ludicrous. It is crazy for somebody to think that the Earth is only 6,000 years old because we can see stars that are billions of years away, right? Neil deGrasse Tyson, by name, called out us, creationists, and said we were crazy for thinking that creationism was a proper theory of how we got here. All right, so that's why we're looking at the starlight problem in particular, is because at least our children and our grandchildren are going to be faced with this, right? I'm not that far away from having graduated high school. I just graduated in 2019, right? That was not that long ago. So our young people are going to be facing this, and as Christians, we need to help them face these problems. So anyway, here's theory number 1 as to how we can see stars that are billions of light years away. The creation theory. God created things out of order. right? Sometimes the question asked, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, God could have created the chicken or the egg first, right? The order doesn't really matter, right? And that concept is kind of hard to wrap our heads around whenever we talk about light. So let's open our Bibles to Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1, and let's just read the first 4 verses and see what God did. Genesis 1 and verse 1, in the beginning, all right, there's nothing there yet. In the beginning, there's nothing besides God. In the beginning, God created what? The heavens and the earth. All right, we're just going to focus on the earth, right? The heavens is the spiritual realm. I don't even know how I would draw that, but in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And what was interesting about the earth? The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, right? So at least there was water present on this sphere that we call home in the beginning. And then verse 3, God said something that we say every morning when we're waking up our spouse or our children. Let there be light. And there was light. All right, maybe you don't say that. Maybe I'm the weird one, right? God said, let there be light. And there was light. All right. Verse 4, and God saw the light, that it was good, and God, I love this phrase. This is a phrase that I've thought about a lot over the last couple of months. I'm working on memorizing Genesis 1 in Hebrew, the original language. And anyway, in the original language it says, and God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light, separated from the light and from the darkness, right? So there's this like intermingling of light and darkness, and then God separates the two from each other, right? Kind of like Skittles and M&Ms. He's separating the two from each other, right? Anyway, that's just a cool little thing that I've picked up on. All right, so we have light and we have darkness, right? Where is the light and where is the darkness coming from? Nope, sun's not been created yet. It's just there. That's interesting, isn't it? Right? And for that matter, darkness wasn't even there before Genesis 1 and verse 2. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. Darkness wasn't even necessarily there before Genesis 1 and verse 1. Right? So darkness is just there. Light is just there. They've been created, but there's no source for these yet. Right? Well, if we continued reading, we would learn that God would eventually make a source. What's the source, Paul? What's the source of light? It's the sun, right? That's the source of our light in the daytime. What's the source of our light at the night? The main source, the moon. And then what's the secondary source? Stars, right? So God made the light, and then he made the source for the light. He made things a little out of order there. And that's hard for us to visualize. How can you have light and not a source for light? All right. In our physical universe, ever since creation week, there's always been a source for light. Yeah. It's possible, right? You know, physics were not my specialty, but he probably said, you know, they're photons, beams, particles, right? It's out of order in our minds, but it's definitely in order for his mind. So, okay, here's another way of picturing this. Let's talk about a star. I drew something that kind of looks like a star, but not really like the sun. So we've got a star, and let's say it's 10 billion of light years away. Right? Which came first, the light or the star? The light, and then the star came there. All right, so it didn't have to necessarily take 10 billion years for it to travel there. Why? because the light was already there, right? Now, while I was researching this, they brought up a particular problem with this theory, that the light of the stars was there before the stars were there. And the particular problem was this. If it's true that the light was there before the stars, then technically we have never seen the stars. And that would be true if we were operating under normal circumstances, but we're not, right? It's miraculous. It's in creation week, so we really don't know. But this is at least one theory. Okay, that's the creation theory. The next theory is the expansion theory, and this theory is popular for at least two reasons. One reason is because there's a number of verses that are going to reference God drawing out the heavens like a curtain. We're just going to look at 3 verses. There are more than just these 3. Actually, let me explain what the expansion theory is first. Okay, so we've got a star, we've got light, we've got it shining on the earth. The expansion theory says that during creation week, the stars were a whole lot closer to Earth. Let's say, within like a week's light year away, or a light year away, or something like that. They were a whole lot closer to the Earth, and then over time they've moved farther and farther away, right? Expansion, right? So they're close enough so that the light can shine on the earth in a normal amount of time, but they're billions of light years away. All right, does anyone see a couple of problems? I can see 2 different problems with this theory right off the top. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I didn't even think about heat. What I was thinking about is gravity. Right. If you got, let's say, for example, we've got a million trillion stars. Right. An amount of stars that we could not even picture. Maybe a googol of stars. Did you all know that Google comes from from a number, Googol, Googol. Kristen, you're shaking your head. What's Googol? Yeah, it's 1 followed by like a trillion zeros or something like that. So it's a lot of zeros, right? All right, so let's say there's a googol of stars, right? And they're all within 6,000 light years of Earth, right? Which is about how old the Earth is. Do you think there's going to be any like gravitational imbalances going on if we have all of this mass, all around us? Yeah, certainly. Everything's going to like collapse in on itself, and you're going to have the opposite of it. You're going to have a big bang, but instead of exploding outwards, it's going to implode, right? So that's problem number 1 with this theory. Problem number 2 is you would have to move really fast for the stars to get 13.8 billion light years away. By the way, they say that the universe is 13.8 billion light years away because that's the farthest star that we can see. So theoretically, if the universe is 13.8 billion years old, then we should be able to see a star 13.8 billion light years away. Anyway, so stars not only would be really close, and that's causing gravity things, but then really far away really quickly, right? Also massive gravity problems, right? That's a couple of problems with it already. But let's look at what the Bible says about it. This is why it's popular, and then I'll make mention why evolution likes this too. Psalm 104 and verse 2, God who covers yourself with light as with a garment, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain. Isaiah 40 verse 22, it is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. All right, so it's spreading. And Zechariah 12 verse 1, the burden of the word of the Lord against Israel. Thus says the Lord, who stretches out the heavens, lays the foundation of the earth, and forms the spirit of man within him. All right, so there's a number of verses that talk about this idea of stretching. And atheism really likes this idea of stretching because where do they say the whole universe came from? A little, top of a pin, right? and then of course it exploded and moved outwards, right? And so they like this idea of expansion, they like this idea of stretching, and so people who want to marry creationism with evolution, they'll usually go for this expansion idea. I don't think it's necessarily a wrong idea. Again, there is some biblical support for it, but it causes some gravitational problems. So, all right, the last theory. This is the one that I kind of subscribe to, but to be honest, I don't think this one will be proven or disproven in our lifetime, and that's because this was only posturized. This was only suggested within the last 120 years. Albert Einstein came up with the theory of relativity, and that's whenever this theory gained a foothold. Anybody know what the theory of relativity is? Yeah, I don't blame you. Why would anybody know what Einstein's theory of relativity is, right? What? Yeah, it has to do with gravity and time, right? Anybody see the movie Interstellar? Right? Okay. You remember in that movie where they went down to this planet? It was called Miller's Planet, and 1 hour there was equal to like 5 years, and they ended up spending 4 hours there, which was 20 years up on the spaceship. You all remember that in that movie? That's because of Einstein's theory of general relativity. Time is different depending on where you're at gravitationally, right? If you are closer to a lot of gravity, you're going to be spending a lot more time. If you're farther away from a lot of gravity, you're going to be spending a lot less time. That's it in a nutshell. We're not going to go too far into it. But anyway, this caused a problem whenever they were studying, whenever they were calculating how fast light moved, right? Why might gravity and time affect light, our understanding of the speed of light? Is light affected by gravity? No, light's not affected by gravity, right? And so we've got a problem where we can calculate for time dilation, but when something is not affected by time dilation, now we've got a problem, right? This might be getting a little over our heads, but here's some pictures. This will make it easier. All right, so we've got a star. Normally, it takes a really long time for the light to come to Earth, right? 13.8 billion years in the maximum example, right? Usually, it takes a really long time for light to travel. But what if, this is the speed of light theory, what if instead of light traveling at its normal rate, what if God, and what if normally light travels really fast one direction, and then just takes a really long time to travel backwards? All right, that's the speed of light theory in a nutshell. Let me explain it a little bit more in detail. Man, this class is 3 points long, and we're still in the first point. So that's not boding well. All right, let me explain this speed of light theory. Okay, so if you got a flashlight and you've got a mirror, you'll see why it's a mirror in a moment. But you've got a flashlight and you've got a mirror, and you want to measure how fast this light travels from the flashlight to the mirror. What you're going to do is you're going to put a clock on either side, right? You're going to have a clock with the flashlight. You're going to have a clock with the mirror, and then you're going to turn on the flashlight, and you're going to start the timer. And whenever it hits the mirror, what are you going to do with the timer there by the mirror? You're going to stop it, right? And so let's say it takes you 5 seconds for it to travel from the light to the mirror, and you stop it after 5 seconds at the mirror, right? How fast would you say that light was traveling? How long did it take? Yeah. Right. So 5 seconds in this scenario, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. So 5 seconds. It takes roughly 5 seconds, right? But the problem is, because of Einstein's theory of general relativity, and by the way, this is a proven theory. In fact, you know how every time that you drive your car, if you put on the GPS, it's going to give you an estimate as to when you will arrive at your destination, right? The only way that estimate can be accurate. And the only way that your phone in general can know what time it is while you're driving is if they will calculate how fast you're going, put it in with the time dilation. And because whenever you're traveling fast, the time is moving slower, right? Anyway, so it's a proven fact, right? So anyway, so if the mirror is so far away, then the clocks are going to be off, right? So that's a problem. So the only way that you can really get the speed of light now, because of Einstein, because he mucked the whole thing up, is if you bounce the light. You get rid of one clock and you bounce the light off the mirror. Is everyone with me? I know this is kind of tedious at this point, right? The only way to measure the speed of light is to bounce it off a mirror and have it come back, right? Because you can't trust another clock because it's going to change how fast the light is going, right? You can't trust how accurate a clock is, right? And so anyway, if we did that, if we bounce it off a mirror, we're going to find that light is traveling at 372,000 miles per second. And if we divide that by 2, then we're going to learn that the one-way speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. And this is usually simplified to just c. So it travels 186 miles per second one way, and then it travels 186 seconds per second the other way. And that's our one-way. That's our two-way speed of light. One-way speed of light. All right. Last slide on this one. This is just an example. What if instead of light traveling 186,000 miles per second in one direction and then 372,000 miles and then 186,000 miles in the opposite direction? What if instead it takes absolutely zero amount of time for light to get to your destination, and then it takes 372,000 miles per second to get back to your destination, right? In other words, it's like if you had to run from here to let's just use Craighead Park as an example, right? If you were sprinting, it might take you like 20 minutes to get to Craighead Park, right? If you were sprinting, even though Craighead is only like 4 miles away, or or 4 minutes away by car, it might take you 20 minutes to get there by sprinting. But if you had to go there and back, sprint one way, how fast is it going to take you to get back here? It's going to take you slower, right? Why? Because you got tired, right? Well, light's the same way. Not that it's getting tired, but because it might be going really fast in one direction and really slow in another direction, right? So that's the speed of light theory. Again, I don't think that's going to be answered in our lifetime. However, right now I think that's the one that has the most scientific proof for it. So that's kind of what I lean towards. Okay, now let's talk about evolution's problems very quickly because we only have 15 minutes left. Their first problem is going to be supernovas. This is the Crab Nebula. This picture was taken off of NASA. A nebula is something that happens after a star explodes, right? So while the star is exploding, it's called a supernova, and then after it's exploded, it's called a nebula, right? So this is the Crab Nebula. Really interesting thing about this, you can go onto this website, creation.com, and they have a whole article about it. Really interesting about the Crab Nebula is that the Crab Nebula, while it was exploding, was actually observed in the year 1054. How long ago was that? That was 1,000 years ago, right? Almost exactly 1,000 years ago, coming up in just 30 years, 29 years. In the year 1054, some Chinese individuals recorded that for a whole year they could see a star in the sky, right? And I guess they plotted out where the star was at exactly in the sky. All right, you think about this. You can see one star in the sky day and night. That's unique, isn't it? Anyone ever see a star during the daytime before besides our sun? Right? So this is a bright star, right? And for a whole year, the star is shining in the sky, right? And so anyway, 1,000 years later, so to modern times, we went and we found where that star was that they were looking at, and it turned out to be this Crab Nebula. And anyway, if you assume that the universe is billions of years old, then you can calculate how many nebulas, how many supernovas we should be able to observe, right? This chart here says that for a supernova in the first stage of the explosion, we should, if the universe is billions of years old, we should see about 2 stars in the first stage of a supernova. If the universe is billions of years old, then we should see, let's just jump to stage 3. We should see 5,000 supernovas if the universe is billions of years old, right? Because there are billions of stars, so we can calculate how many supernovas theoretically we should be seeing. Well, guess how many supernovas we have actually observed that are in the third stage of the star's explosion? 0. And guess how many stars we've seen that are in the second stage of explosion? Not 2,000, which would be the case if it were billions of years old, but we have seen instead 200. Right? What does this suggest? This suggests that all the stars are pretty young, and that not a lot of them are close to death. Right? So, supernovas. Nebulas, they're going to be a problem. Another problem is going to be redshift. Okay. So there's this wave of light, right? On the left you've got ultraviolet light. On the right you have infrared light. These are colors that we can't see. Well, anyway, when a star is really far away, it's going to redshift. In other words, it's going to appear more red. The light is going to stretch out a little bit more, and it's going to appear more infrared. When it's a little bit closer, it's going to appear a little bit more blue. It's going to appear a little bit more ultraviolet, right? So if you've got 2 stars in the sky and one appears a little bit more red than the other one, what does that suggest? If red means farther away, what does a red star suggest? It's older and it's farther away, right? Right. That's a basic breakdown, right? Of course, we can't really see the colors, right? So there are red stars here, blue stars, but theoretically speaking, if a star is emitting more infrared light, then it's going to be farther away, right? So the red stars are going to be behind the blue star. All right. In another article by creation.com, it says that the objects we call quasars are generally supposed to be at the very edge of the visible universe. They're supposed to be superluminous black holes with millions of hundreds of millions of more stars. And anyway, what we found was in this particular picture taken by the Hubble Space Telescope, what we found was that the redshift theory, which was first calculated by a fellow named Hubble. Have you ever heard of his last name before? He's a little big in the astronomy business, isn't he? Hubble Space Telescope. Hubble found out that the redshift was how we can calculate the distance of stars. That's how we calculate the distance of stars, is depending on how red they are. And so anyway, they found that this quasar was measuring 35 billion light years away, and this galaxy that the Hubble Space Telescope took a picture of was only measuring 260 million years away, right? So that kind of pans out. However, hold on, let me go back. However, the quasar was most definitely in front. All right, the quasar, the red star, let's just simplify it. The red star was in front of the blue star, which suggests that it's closer, which suggests that Hubble's original theory as to red stars being farther away is wrong. All right, so that's a problem for evolution, right? Their theories about how far stars away is a flawed theory, right? Okay, last little thing that they have, universal temperature. Again, we can see 13.8 billion light years away. This is called the cosmic microwave background. We're going to call it the observable universe. That's how far away we can see from this Earth is 13.8 billion light years away. And anyway, if you go on to this article by creation.com, they're going to talk about this in this highlighted portion, but generally speaking, this is what's going on from all around the observable universe. We have about the same temperature, right? There's this even dispersion of energy throughout the observable universe, which would be impossible if the universe was billions of light years old, or billions of years old. And the reason why the temperature being evenly dispersed, the whole universe being the same basic temperature is a weird thing, is because that would suggest that the whole universe would have still be touching each other. They haven't dispersed abroad yet, right? So anyway, that's the last problem. Okay, let's talk in our last 7.5 minutes. Let's talk about constellations, right? The Bible actually does say a lot about constellations. Here's just a few verses. Isaiah 13 and verse 10, "For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine." This is an apocalyptic image, but the reference to constellations is there pretty clearly. I skipped one. Acts 28 and verse 11, there's a reference to a ship which had a figurehead which had two constellations on it. Acts 28 and verse 11, "After 3 months we sailed in an Alexandrian ship whose figurehead was the twin brothers which had wintered at the island." Right, this is the twin brothers of Gemini, Pollux, and Castor. So there's a somewhat of a reference to constellations there. Amos 5 and verse 8 is another reference. Real interesting reference. Amos 5 verse 8, "He," who's that, do you think talking about? Who's the he there? "God made the Pleiades and Orion." You've heard of Orion's belt? God made these two constellations. That's interesting. "He turns the shadow of death into morning and makes the day dark as night. He calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out on the face of the earth. The Lord is his name." All right, God made the constellations. Job 38, 31 through 32, God is speaking here. That's really important. God himself is speaking to Job here from the whirlwind, and he asks Job, "Can you bind the cluster of Pleiades or loose the belt of Orion?" Now that's interesting, isn't it? The belt of Orion. We would assume that the belt of Orion, the constellations, were originally mapped out by the Greeks, right, in our minds. But here Job is written about 2,000 years before the Greeks ever became a civilization. Here Job is written as, I think, the very first book of the Bible, written before Genesis even. And what is God mentioning here? He made the belt of Orion. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Can you bring out Mazzaroth in its season? The King James and New King James just leaves it as Mazzaroth because they really weren't sure how to translate the word. Some more modern translations, including the Legacy Standard Bible and the New English Translation, which just came out in the last 5 years, they translate this as constellations. Constellations. Can you bring out constellations in its season? Or can you guide the great bear with his cubs? That's another constellation. All right, so God mentions 3 different constellations here. Very interesting. Okay, let's talk about constellations just a little bit. You all have heard about the zodiac sign. Zodiacs is a series of constellations, right? Zodiac specifically, you can go on to this website here, starwalk.space, and they will show you in this website here that the zodiacs all represent the perfect month, right? A 30-day month. So, theoretically there's, 12 zodiacs? 12 zodiacs. Yeah. Anyway, each constellation, each zodiac is a month, right? That's why sometimes people will be looking at their zodiac signs. It's their month, right? Anyway, so we've got 12 different constellations here, and perhaps, I want to emphasize that, perhaps these constellations, especially the zodiac, these constellations perhaps were written by God to first share his will with mankind. All right. Before we go any further, I want to point out that if the constellations ever did reveal God's will, I think they no longer do. I think the meaning has been lost. Right? But there are a number of verses, including Psalm 19:1 and 2. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night utters knowledge. There are a number of verses that suggest that the stars were originally given to share God's message with mankind, right? The constellations in particular. So what we're going to do for the remainder of the 3 minutes that we have in class is look at some possible explanations as to what these constellations might be pointing at in the Bible, right? And again, I think the true meaning has been lost to time, but I also think that God originally did make these constellations to share his will. So it's worth at least, I think, guessing at what the message of the constellations originally were. Okay, the first of the zodiac in particular is Aquarius. Aquarius means water bearer. John 4 verses 13 and 14, Jesus says to the woman at the well, I can give you living water and you will never thirst again, right? So that might be a possible explanation as to this water bearer. The next constellation is the February month is Pisces, which is the fishes. In Mark 1 and verse 17, Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men." Fishes were the symbol of abundance back in the day, and if you had multiple fishes, then you were well off. It's the idea of valuing things. Aries is the ram or lamb. This one's pretty simple whenever it's applied to Christianity, isn't it? John 1 verse 29, John the Baptist says about Jesus, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." The next one is the Taurus, who's the bull in 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 16. Jesus is described coming in victory, charging in victory for Judgment Day. A bull was charging and often meant victory in that day and time. Notice again, some of the meanings probably lost to our modern days. The next is Gemini, that's the twins. It's the idea of brotherly love. Matthew 22:39, the second greatest command is thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Next is Cancer, and comes from a crab, and this one is the most lost of the original meanings. They think that, by the way, all these constellations are the same throughout all the civilizations, right? Chinese, Egyptian, so Africa, and the Greeks all had the same constellations, right? And they had mostly the same names. For this one in particular, Cancer, they had wildly different names, right? So the book that I was reading is called Witness of the Stars. It suggested that the Persian name for this constellation was probably the most accurate, in which it said it means to bind, right? And this would be the idea of God binding things, God forcing things on, forcing his rule, indicating his will, and how he will not let his will be ignored. Next is Leo, the lion of Judah, Revelation 5 and verse 5, who is Jesus. The next is Virgo. Virgo means virgin. Isaiah 7 verse 14, the virgin is going to conceive and bring forth a child. His name is Jesus. Libra, that's the scales, right? Think about justice. Proverbs 16 verse 11, God, honest weights and scales are the Lord's. Next one is scorpion, in Luke 10 verse 19. Jesus says, "Behold, I give you the authority to trample on serpents and scorpions," right? So it's the idea of trampling out the enemy. Along the same lines, the next one is Orpheus, which is the man holding a serpent. Genesis 3 and verse 15, the serpent's head is going to be bruised. The next one is Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the archer. Sin, as a lot of us know, is an archery term. Sin means to miss the mark. It's anything besides bullseye. Leviticus 16 verse 8 is the verse for Capricornus, which is the fish goat. This one I think was probably originally like a fish for some cultures and a goat for other cultures, and they kind of melded it together to be a fish goat. But a goat is pretty easy for us to figure out what that means in Christianity. It's the idea of sacrifice. Fish is also pretty easy for us to figure out in Christianity. It's also abundance again. So Leviticus 16 verse 18, they're going to have two goats. One's going to be the scapegoat. So that's the constellations, and that is stars and their purpose. And there was a lot more information I could have covered.